start. On that note, Sam, it's really great to have you. And maybe I'll just start off with a reflection that will soon enough become a question to you to get us started. And I'm not just saying this because you're on the podcast. You're actually a second-time guest, which is quite rare. But you are I think you're one of the best leftist writers out there right now.
Wow, thank you so much.
One might say that's a low bar. But like on a serious note, as someone who struggles with my own political and ideological self-identification, where a lot of people take issue when I describe myself as of the left or left of center or whatever it might be, not to get into that, but I guess as I get older, I'm less clear about those labels, but I am more clear about certain moral intuitions and aesthetic sensibilities that animate my worldview, and I don't think they naturally map on well with what's called the left-right ideological spectrum. But if I did have to choose a label and own it and commit to it, like whenever I read your work, I feel I want to be on the left, even if other people don't think I'm on the left.
That's really high praise. I appreciate that so much.
Yeah, and I mean it, because I feel like when I read a lot of leftists, I'm like, actually, you know what? I don't want to be a part of this.
So Sam, let me praise you in a different way.
Okay.
Let's
do this for the full hour.
Yeah, well, this will just be the praise Sam hour. I think the people are here for that. That's fine. The crowd loves that. No, look, I put it differently. You're a great writer, and that's the reality of it, because I think you're a straight shooter, and I don't think your politics necessarily intrude get in the way of good writing. I think that's what separates someone who's
Demir. You like me despite my politics, and Shadi approves of both, or wants to like my politics when he reads my work.
The beauty of it is that I generally know where you're coming from, but that's not what I come to your work for. You know what I mean? I think that's the what I think, quite frankly, any of us really should aspire to is to engage with ideas and get to the bottom of things. I mean, that's what we're doing on this podcast anyway, right? And it's not about sort of partisan sorting. I mean, whatever. I guess I'm more to the right of Shadi, but I don't think Shadi's all that to the left. I mean, you said aesthetics, Shadi. I think that's a weird and interesting thing that you feel like the aesthetics somehow keep you from the left. I'm not sure.
Wait, why do you?
What are leftist aesthetics like Stalinist art? Like, what are we talking about here?
Like brutalist architecture?
Yeah, you're just not that. You're into more sort of, I don't know what, like,
or like hippie co-ops.
Yeah.
Anarchist bookstores, gardens.
Oh, so you like money, is what you're saying, Shadi?
We'll get to money for sure. But Sam, sorry, go ahead.
Well, thanks, guys. I am now slightly uncomfortable. It was good for the first few minutes, and now it's too much. But yeah, I mean, I think the main thing I try to do when I write is make sure it's interesting and meets my like aesthetic standards. That's basically it, and I think if you read a lot of sort of opinion writing on the left, there are so many quirks and hang-ups and sort of shorthands that just suck, and it makes it so it is easy to have your eyes glaze over and not really remember what the stakes are, or what is trying to be, what the moral content of any of the words are, and I just try not to do that,
yeah.
Especially Go ahead.
No, finish your thought, because we're gonna start being less nice to you in a minute.
Good. Yeah, good. Well, I was just gonna say that right before we got on the call, Demir was talking about the news business and how it suffered because Trump left, and maybe it'll get its feet back when Trump is, now that Trump is in the news again. But there really was a moment in like online digital news, digital media, when suddenly people wanted to hear from left-wing voices to a much greater degree than they had in the past. In the like kind of around the Bernie moment. And sort of like before that, Jacobin sort of started in like 2014 or 13 maybe. And suddenly like there was all this left wing media content. And while some of it was really good, and I'm glad that that thing happened because I think probably it helped me get my first pieces. First of all, that moment's over. And so people are having to figure out how to be interesting and have careers, given that, the VC capital has dried up for all those digital media outlets. And I got bored of that. And it sort of, there was a sort of rote way people started writing about left-wing topics that took shape as a result of that kind of short flourishing of money for left-wing ideas. And I just try not to do that.
Yeah, and I feel like there was a moment where I used to hear the phrase working class a lot more, but especially white working class, WWC, and there was like a whole cottage industry around that.
Yeah.
And I was just reflecting the other day, I feel like a lot of that discourse just dissipated and no one really took the lessons of that seriously, like as it related to, well, maybe class does matter in these interesting ways. And, the phrase working class can obviously be weaponized and, misconstrued by both sides. But the fact that everything now seems to be culture war all the time. And I'm guilty of this sometimes too, like wokeness and, seeing the divide in America as being between woke and anti-woke or culturally left versus, I guess being a reactionary. That's maybe not always the best way to look at politics. And so I think we all have to be like a little bit more careful about that because economics does matter, and we'll talk about how it does matter in a couple different cases. I do want to mention and very highly recommend your recent op-ed in the New York Times. It's a big piece. It's an ambitious piece, even though it's relatively short, as all op-eds are. It's called "The One Thing Trump Has That DeSantis Never Will." So check that out in the show notes. Obviously, there's a lot to say about DeSantis versus Trump, and as is our wont on this podcast, we don't want to get too much into the horse race aspects of it. We want to make sure we're keeping in mind the kind of first principles. And that's what's cool about your piece is that you do dig deeper, and you seem to be suggesting that these two candidates are just fundamentally animated by different impulses in a pretty profound way. And after reading your piece, I thought to myself, if I was someone who voted for Republicans and I had read Sam Adler-Bell's op-ed in the New York Times, based on that, I would vote for Donald Trump.
Yeah.
I know that wasn't your intent, and I don't know if others have criticized you for that there is, I don't want to say a sympathy for the Trumpist impulse, but there isn't, I think that you grasp that Trump channeled something important and distinctive that DeSantis very much does not. Anyway, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but feel free to take that where you will.
Well, that makes total sense to me. I did have that thought. Like, this is my Trump endorsement op-ed. I'm surprised that people haven't given me more of a hard time about it, frankly. And I don't know if I've said this on my podcast, but Steve Bannon really liked it. He talked about it on his podcast, which I haven't been advertising because that's really how I fucked up. But he was saying like, this guy is obviously our enemy, but there's something about this piece that's good, and I think that's probably what he was picking up on. And yeah, I think that's right. Basically what I was trying to do with that piece was, the first thought I had is, what do we mean when we talk about DeSantis's competence? Like, so much of the way that the two get distinguished and sort of as foils for each other is that Trump is erratic and brash and maybe has this sort of fox-like intelligence, but no real bookish intelligence, that he just operates on instinct, and he's, irrational and bumbling. And DeSantis is, by contrast, precise and careful, and he reads all the time, and he's, very well educated and competent. That was what we kept saying. What was interesting is that there's sort of agreement across the political spectrum and sort of media pundits that like DeSantis is the competent version of Trump with a brain. I read that in right-wing publications and left-wing publications and in the middle,
But having a brain and being competent are quite different things, though.
Yeah, but I think what they meant really, usually when that sort of shorthand Trump with a brain was elaborated on, it was about how DeSantis would be disciplined, and competent and not be kind of following whatever whim of the last person he talked to, So for right-wingers who prefer DeSantis, they like that, because Trump wasn't reliable for them, DeSantis might be, reliable, more ideologically disciplined and more capable of executing the sort of the agenda. But I thought, so after having that thought, I was like, well, what are we talking about when we talk about competence? And if Trump doesn't have it, what is Trump's appeal? And in fact, is there something about distinguishing them in that way that points to something Trump does have, like the opposite, which is a sort of anti-competence? This kind of like I elaborate in the piece, this kind of representing a sort of revolt against the idea that only certain people, certain kind of smart people who know how to speak the right way, who went to the right schools, can lead and can be, be the president. And Trump did kind of evince disdain for that attitude, and people who disdained that, even just sort of atmospherically, were attracted to him.
The thing that I really loved about the piece is that I've also been unable to shake. I remember in 2016, the run up to Trump won. I was working at the American Interest, center right publication. We have young staffers that like straight out of college, usually coming from sort of conservative backgrounds, and are much more activisty. I've sort of been in center right publications and sort of affiliated with that a lot, but generally, I don't know. Shadi takes pains to identify with the left. I don't take pains to identify with anything. But it was interesting in 2016 how all my young staffers were just head over heels over Marco Rubio. And I just remember being like, guys, this guy is a fucking fraud. He is a good study who has talked to a bunch of interest groups. At the time, I remember he was really going heavily through his like liberal internationalist neocon phase, and was a big study of that. And he was very polished. And I remember he gave a speech, I think at AEI, and everyone was like, "Oh my God, Marco Rubio," and all this. And I was like, "My God, man, it's just like it's so fake."
You can hear the white papers in his speeches.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what really, and then, when Chris Christie just demolished him on stage that time, I remember coming back to the office the next day. I was like, ha, you see, that's exactly it. And I can't.
Takes one big guy from New Jersey to put that guy in his place.
Exactly that. And I just can't shake that feeling about DeSantis too. And I think that's something that like really comes through in your piece. He's sort of like ultimately he's a Frankenstein monster. He's studied Trump and like picked up a few pieces. He's also, talked to like the Cruz constituency and just sort of like cobbled together this sort of thing, trying to be a more competent Trump and still sort of, sotto voce speaking to the constituencies of like respectable remaining Republicans and sort of cobble this all together. But, what I wanted to push you on, it's something Shadi said, is about, we don't talk about class, but class still sort of functions in this. I mean, this is much a question for Shadi. Like, what exactly did you mean about that? And I mean, and to you, Sam, I mean, is this a class question in the traditional sort of the way the left talks about class? Is this a class issue, or would you care? I think of it as something else, but like, do you guys, the two of you, think of it in terms of class? That's what we're talking about here. He's more authentically speaking for a class.
Should I go first?
No, however, go ahead.
Well, there's a couple things going on. For one thing, it's like, there's a weird thing that's happened with our sociology, right? Where basically when we say working class, we mean undereducated, right? That was like that's kind of all of the sort of Trump white working class meme is about his support from the less educated, which is a proxy for class in most of these conversations. But the funny thing about that, which doesn't always, obviously, as we all are always being told, that doesn't necessarily map up with income necessarily. People can own car dealerships and not have graduated from high school and stuff like that. But what's interesting is that in my piece, I am sort of talking more about the education divide. So it's one of the things we're finding in whatever preliminary polling you can see about the Republican primary electorate and which candidate is getting which base. DeSantis is doing way better with the highly educated, and Trump is continuing to hold on to the highly educated in the cities and suburbs, and Trump is holding on to the less educated and people in rural areas. His base he's holding on to that. And I think, but when it comes to this question of like, elites, technocracy, sort of expertise as being sort of what Trump was represented, some kind of disruption against the cult of expertise or competence or sort of Ivy League superiority. That doesn't necessarily have to be about class. But these things are elided because of that kind of sociological elision that has taken place over about what is class. But maybe that's enough for now. Let's see what Shadi has to say.
Yeah, I mean, it is worth underscoring that there are elites who can be quite poor and are quite poor. I mean, I know some of them. A lot of them live in New York. So you can be, a junior staffer at, or somewhat junior person at a leading cultural mainstream institution like, say, the New York Times, and you'll be seen as being part of the elite.
Yeah.
And you'll probably even see yourself as being part of the elite, even if you won't admit that in quite those terms. And that's really remarkable that, and then that you can have a poor elite, but then, as you mentioned, Sam, a car dealership owner or small business owner who's making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, if not more, who could see themselves as representing the lower classes.
Some kind of underclass.
Yeah, underclass and revolting against elites.
Yeah.
So in some ways that obviously dilutes the impact of class as we traditionally understand it. And I mean, that's obviously part of the problem in a lot of this is that Americans seem to struggle to be class conscious. And maybe that's also a good thing. I mean, do we really want to be like Britain, where class has, I think, a more distinct and narrow meaning? And, there's probably a lot there we can unpack. But I'm curious about this point about, DeSantis as a Frankenstein monster. And it makes me wonder if there's something about the Republican base that absolutely desires and needs what might be called authenticity.
Yes, I was about to bring the A word into this.
Yeah, because I think that's the issue with Rubio. That's the issue with DeSantis. Even when I'm observing them from afar, if anyone asks me, like, what does Ron DeSantis actually want or desire or believe? I'd struggle to give you an answer of any sort. It's sort of the same way I feel about Mike Pompeo, if people remember who he was. You don't have to remember him, but that, wait, what is this guy really about? And I don't think anyone looks at Donald Trump and wonders, wait, what is this Trump guy really about? On a very visceral, intuitive level, we know what he's about. At least I think I know what he's about. Yeah, all too well. Yeah.
But it's there's a thirst for authenticity, but it's maybe, just to add another word to it, it's an authentic resentment, I think, is what it is. And that's why, that's why I was pushing both of you on this idea of class, whether, the white working class, we've forgotten about it as an explanatory variable, and maybe it's making a comeback. I wonder if it was ever the right explanatory variable, right? That there's a sort of a deep well of resentment about. Now, resentment is maybe, I think it's an accurate word to use, but maybe not fully descriptive of it. There's a kind of like a revolt, really, is what we're talking about, and it's wedded to a certain kind of resentment of the status quo, but it's a desire to overthrow, and it's Rubio's sort of Frankenstein was actually just a Frankenstein of establishment stuff, and so he stood no chance against Trump for that. But it's where DeSantis is, he's cobbled together some Trumpism into this sort of stuff, and it's not credible, I think, is what it is, right? And it's a credibility that he's not playing into that mindset of overthrow. Like, is that right, Sam? It's like, this is your job. Your job is know your enemy, and you've done a lot of this, and it's like, so it's resentment, right? It's something like that that's at the core of this.
Well. There's I wanted to say something about Trump and authenticity first, which is that it's obviously, and it has to be said, and every time this conversation happens, it does get said, there's an irony, obviously, because he lies all the time, and we know that he's lying all the time. And everybody knows that he lies. So he's authentically inauthentic often. But really what he is he's the con man. It's right that he's a very known and sort of long-lasting sort of character type in the American mythos, which is the music man, the person who comes to town and lies, but you want to believe the lies more than you care whether they're true, and ultimately you enjoy getting conned, and that's Trump. So that. It's never been hard for me to reconcile his lying with his authenticity, because he's authentically a liar.
One might even say that his lies reflect a deeper truth.
You're saying that.
Good. That's that clip becomes a social media.
Oh God, yeah. But I do think this is actually like a right-wing trope that I have heard. Like, apologists of Trump have. It also I think hits at the take him seriously but not literally. Like, words, like Trump uses words in a postmodern sense. They're not meant to convey meaning or accuracy. They're meant to convey states of mind. And I think what feels authentic to me about Trump is his state of mind, that he is resentful, and that never seems to waver. And that seems to drive so much of who he is. And
he's wounded, and he's, something was taken from him that he wants back. I think this can get us back to kind of DeSantis and the questions of the elite. But did you guys watch Dave Chappelle's SNL monologue when he was back on SNL a few months ago? It's incredible. It's absolutely great. And he does a bit about Trump. I actually think he might say, I think I may have cribbed from him, authentic liar, because he does this bit about Trump where he's talking about how Trump was the guy who came out of the house where all the rich, fancy, important people were. He came out of the house, and he came out and he said, you know what's going on in there? They're doing drugs. They're having sex with children. It's just as disgusting and terrible and greed fueled and morally vacuous as you think. It's just like that. You're right. And then he just went back into the house.
Yeah, you know, on the Conman thing, you know, I remember when I was working at the American Interest with Walter Russell Mead, I know he always sort of encouraged junior staffers, and you know, not having read the book myself, I remember back then I did give it a quick read. There's a Herman Melville book called The Confidence Man. And Walter would always say that this is a really important, like, text to understand America. And this is pre-Trump. He was saying this, and it's because, as I recall, you know, Melville sort of conjures up this character, it's like traveling on a riverboat in Mississippi, and it's less a novel and sort of just a series of anecdotes about this guy moving through America and swindling America. But the flip side of it is that Americans want to be swindled by it. You know, there's a real almost desire. And there's something about, you know, a man on the make and like doing whatever it takes to do it that like also taps into something American, you know, like
totally.
And maybe even a sense of maybe imposter syndrome, that to see someone pull it off on such a scale, it taps into a certain kind of feeling like of possibility. Yeah. You know, it's like the American dream in a weird way.
So I totally agree with that. And there's that's one of the things about Trump. And again, it's like these are truisms now, but like, you know, the people who look down on Trump would basically say in effect that the people who look down on me look down on you too.
Yeah.
And that's just true, you know, like whatever you want to say, like, you know, Basket of Deplorables was maybe not like the hugest, you know, mistake she made in that campaign, but it was saying what a lot of elites felt, and liberal elites, and it was a gift to Trump, obviously, because that was his message. They hate me in the same way they hate you. You know, like I think this didn't end up in the piece, but I had a line about everybody remembers when Trump said, I love the uneducated. I love the uneducated, you know? But what people don't remember is the next line he said, we are the smartest. Yeah. We're the most loyal.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
That is interesting. He included himself among them. And I think everyone always understood that he meant himself to be among them. Although sometimes it's also like the insult comic bit where like they like to be, you know, shit on by him for their crude ways or whatever. But yeah, I think.
But doesn't that bring us back to like the dominance of culture war? Because what Trump is conveying here is not. It is fundamentally about disdain, resentment, and humiliation, and I think those map onto cultural modes, perhaps more than strictly economic or materialist ones. Yeah. Just like as a little just aside, and it just came to mind right now. You know, Tom Friedman, putting aside what one might think of him, you know,
coming on this podcast, like, just assuming what's going to happen is that Shadi is going to bring up Tom Friedman. Like, you guys are really fulfilling all my expectations. Go on.
The funny thing is I don't actually bring him up all that much, but I think he had a particular insight after 9/11. This must have been in the early 2000s, where I think the quote is something like, humiliation is the most underestimated force in politics and international relations.
He was talking about Muslims then, right? If I remember.
He was talking
about how we needed to go blow up whatever Muslim country we could.
Humiliation and them. Grab them by the testicles, and like, wasn't that the line? Something like that. Like, grab the humiliated person. Anyway.
Like we got to make them feel like something like we got to make them feel pain. I mean, I don't think he mentioned genitalia per se, but I do think there is something quite insightful. But then I do wonder, Sam, like, doesn't that trap us in the cultural mode? And as far as I can tell from your writing, I think part of you is enchanted by cultural debates, and you obviously love culture and reading, because you read a lot of books in your, you know, in order to write what you write, and that's a big part of your podcast, Know Your Enemies, reading voices from the cultural right. But so I guess I wonder if you're sometimes torn that part of what you're arguing for seems to bring us towards culture, but maybe deep down you want us to care more about class.
I mean, I think it's lamentable in many respects, but I also don't think, I don't think just saying, let's talk about class over and over again and everything one writes really makes any difference. I mean, people do that all the time, you know? So you have to, like, you know, play the hand that you're dealt, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree. Obviously, what we're talking about is all these kinds of, like, you know, sort of atmospheric, like, affects of politics instead of the actual material, you know, material realities and sort of relationships of power. And you know, but those things are mediated by these affects in our politics today. So it would be a mistake to just, I mean, I know a lot of people, also, I'm just not actually like a particularly good, you know, I'm not like an economics knower. I'm not even like a good Marxist, you know, like, my feel for politics has much more to do with the kind of culture, the ways that which politics and even, you know, material realities are mediated by culture. So that's what I have to do.
So how real are the material realities then? Because obviously they're mediated and there's a lot of variables and they intertwine in complex ways. But I mean, I guess a fundamental question, and maybe it's too simplistic to put it this way, there are some people who seem to feel and believe with every fiber of their being that human beings are fundamentally animated and motivated by material interests and objectives. And, you know, that is a first principle debate that we're not going to resolve here. But how real is the material reality in the sense that even if it is mediated by all these cultural affects, presumably there is still a core of economic grievance? Would you go that far?
Yeah. I mean, I think material reality is real.
No. But I mean, he's saying, you know, like economic materialism. Let me just jump in on one thing, because I don't want to lose this thread before we get on this, because you said the basket of deplorables, right? As you know, an unfortunate misstep. And I immediately remembered a piece. Let me see when it came out. 2019 by Matthew Walther, came out in The Week. I don't know if you guys remember it.
The Barstool conservatism piece?
No. It was just a quick week. It says the title is "The Jeffrey Epstein Case is Why People Believe in Pizzagate," and he has.
But that's right.
And he has this incredible passage. I'm just going to read it here. Usually Shadi reads the things in dramatic voice on the podcast, but I'm going to read it in a non-dramatic voice because it's so right. Goes through basically detailing all the stuff that was coming out about Jeffrey Epstein at the time. And he says, we should keep all this in mind the next time we feel inclined to sneer at so-called, quote, low information voters, especially the kookier sort. You know the people I mean. Wackos, gun nuts, 8chaners, conspiracy theorists in middle America who watch InfoWars, one of the few journalistic outlets to discuss the issue of pedophilia regularly, and post about QAnon and spirit cooking and the lizard people. The news that a globalized cabal of billionaires and politicians and journalists and Hollywood bigwigs might be flying around the world raping teenage girls will not surprise them in the least, because it is what they've long suspected. And you know, so it's not just missteps by the elite that they say things that they believe. It's like in that case,
so now, they're actually on that plane.
And that's to the Dave Chappelle point as well, right? About like Trump, and but that was a unique moment in the sort of Trump thing that has been kind of forgotten. I just thought that piece just really nailed it. So I mean, maybe that's sort of a pushback again to this question of like how much does class matter in it. There's always been in America, and you know, you wrote another piece at my current home, the Washington Post, a book review about the Birchers. There's a deep thread of conspiratorial thinking, and you know, Hofstadter and all of that. But even Hofstadter himself sort of attributes this to a kind of, you know, that's not us. That's like that outer America, and this is like boiling on the outside. I've just been struck by, that it's always been there. And I was talking to a friend about this the other day. I think it's maybe the younger generation that really came to political consciousness under Obama, that they felt that America really was different. Me coming up, I played in punk rock bands. I lived in Baltimore. Like, we had a feeling of like, and the music I listened to in the 90s, it was just like weird, obscure stuff that really like not embraced and celebrated, but sort of like latched onto and looked into the abyss of sort of that seamy side of America. It didn't celebrate it, but it was like a grotesque
American berserk.
Yes. And go back further, Hunter Thompson's whole sort of writing, the whole underbelly of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas is him finding himself in that what was that, a conference of police officers high on acid at one point. And, he's the descriptions there are amazing, but it's getting at something that's always been there. That I think that there's something that people that came up under Obama, they were like, no, progress is real. No, that's not America. This is the America. I think from my perspective, having lived through all of this, I think Obama was a uniquely talented politician who was able to maybe lift up the discourse for 8 years. But it was only discourse. He himself was actually a pretty cautious, pragmatic politician who talked a big game.
Politician.
Yeah. And I think of all the politicians in my lifetime, the only one I'd really love to talk to is Obama, to get a sense of like what lies underneath this. And I think Shadi on foreign policy has dinged Obama a lot for talking a good game but not living up to his principles. I've always found Obama quite charming in the fact that he was able to talk such a good game but actually existed in the world as it was. You know what I mean? Like, and he existed in America as it always was.
He's a Burkean.
Yeah, kinda. And America is America, and this is not to say, this is not for me to be like particularly somehow, fatalistic about it, but it is to just look at it in the face. And that's what was so amazing about Trump, is that like, it was all the arguments, that were, I think, really teeth gnashing after 8 years of Obama. Trump comes in, it's like, racism is back. It's reverting, all the rest of this. I don't believe for a second that Obama wouldn't have trounced Trump and you would have had 12 years of Obama or 16 years of Obama, quite frankly, if that was possible. So, in fact, I don't think America was transformed under Obama or was a different country. It's just that, like, Trump is... That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that Trump revealed the authenticness of America. America is all of that, ultimately.
Yeah.
But Trump is a very important, very authentic, and permanent facet of America as well.
Well, Tamir, I would maybe just add George W. Bush to the story, because I don't think we can really talk about Obama without talking about what came before it. In this sense, there is a continuity that, both Bush and Obama spoke to a kind of intellectual elitism. I mean, let's not forget that the Bush administration was populated by PhDs and people who were like quite intellectually engaged. I mean, some of them were neoconservatives. And I think there was a bipartisan consensus, if you will, up until Trump, that smarter, more intelligent, more educated people should be the ones governing America. And I don't mean that as a pejorative. I think that's actually the way a lot of governing elites think about their own role in democracies, that there are better people to govern. That's why we have technocrats and specialists who focus in particular niche areas and so forth. But, I think it is, at a basic level, elites weren't good at being elites. Like, I think the argument for them would be stronger if they had actually done a good job. But particularly with George W. Bush, we see a rather disastrous job on any number of levels, whether it's managing a hurricane or whether it's managing a war. But I think the same argument can be extended, maybe at a less intensely with Barack Obama and some of the failures that we saw in both foreign policy and domestic policy, which is that sometimes really intelligent, brilliant people who are very highly educated are not particularly competent.
Don't you think Obama would have won, though? And this gets
Right.
back to something you've always talked about, like output legitimacy. I think Obama would have won again, and Bush and Obama were good at actually reaching out to the forgotten class, if you will. I mean, Bush's whole shtick was that, and Obama, I remember, was actually
2008 was that campaign was incredible in that, exactly that regard.
Exactly, and I was going to bring that up. I remember Obama, talking around 2008 or maybe after his victory about the efforts he made, especially to reach out to regions, to parts, the electorate that he knew he wouldn't win. But he went to the trouble to go talk to them. This is Hillary's unique failure, is that she failed to do that and was somehow, snooty about it, like not just unable to reach out and like even try, but like just failed to connect completely and was just reaching out to the sort of educated classes. But again, it's the mistake here, Shadi, if you'll allow me, I think is something that you're very attentive to in the macro sense, in democracy promotion and the stuff of it. It's not output legitimacy for any of this. Obama's failures and Bush's failures were not tied to their success as politicians. And I think for all of Obama's failures, he would have destroyed Trump.
What's output legitimacy? What's output legitimacy for me and the listeners? What's output legitimacy?
Shadi, go ahead. I can talk about it. Output legitimacy is this idea that like outputs of that like politicians legitimate themselves by what they deliver
proof is in the pudding.
Rather than proof's in the pudding rather than through politics. And I think Shadi, you'll correct me on this, but like I think where we've usually gone on this is basically that Shadi's line on democracy is that democracy is a good in itself, whereas autocrats often say, forget about that democracy shit, I'm just going to give you the goodies and I will deliver. So that's kind of that output legitimation. That's why I'm just digging Shadi on this, saying that like Bush and Obama failed to deliver and therefore it's the failure of the elites. I think Bush and Obama were, all faced divides in the country, but both succeeded to bridge them in order to win. Now, Bush less successfully. He arguably, in the first election, failed on a lot of this stuff.
I'm gonna have to take issue with some of this analysis, Demir, if you'll indulge me. I mean, you're right that Obama would have won, but I think that is missing whatever the saying is, the forest for the trees, or maybe it's the other way around. But even if Obama was a very successful, occasionally charming politician who people wanted to vote for, there's like a broader thread of resentment and disappointment and anger that's building from basically post 9/11 until 2015. And that's a product of elites of both parties. And with Obama, the financial recession, I think, which somewhat surprisingly doesn't come up all that much, when we talk about the past, but it is worth remembering that did happen. And, others can make the argument a lot better than I can. Like, someone like Matt Stoller, who's been very focused on the point that Obama basically bought into corporate elite preferences and bailing out banks. And there wasn't any real recognition of the profound income inequality that was building and has continued to build since then. I mean, all of this kind of creates a sort of mood music for the resentment that Trump is able to tap into. I mean, a lot of Americans have a fundamental sense that something has not been right for a long time. It hasn't worked out well for them, whoever them is, isn't there something deeper here that Obama could have maybe papered over that and won another 4 years, but he wouldn't have been addressing something structurally deep, a kind of rot that was rotting.
Sam, over to you on that one. I think we've said our piece here now. Adjudicate.
I tend to be inclined towards that. The elites deserve the scorn that they receive. So I agree with Shadi that there were real kind of failures, and a long trajectory, and a whole lot of mood music for things like Trump's rise and Bernie's relative success. So yeah, I agree with that. I think the question of like these individual presidents and kind of whether they succeeded at telling a story about America that enough people could see themselves in to kind of hold something together that felt like it came undone under Trump. That might be that these kind of real resentments about elite failures like inform that question, but it's also just like, you know, I could see the argument that this sort of between the two of you, which Obama kind of held something together through the force of his extraordinary personality and political effectiveness, which was already breaking, and then it came undone when he was gone. I don't think that if that's the case, that doesn't necessarily mean that these deeper, you know, sort of trajectories of elite failure and their consequences aren't real. I think it's just so interesting to have to. I mean, this is so banal. I've been doing too much podcasting, but it's like it's very interesting that the presidency of Trump followed the presidency of Obama. But to me, in part because of that question about the feeling that like the berserk just like was unleashed by Trump. That feeling that like the Obama years were the years of good order and sort of hopefulness, and the Trump years were the era of insanity and resentment. Of course, we know that's not entirely a true story, because you know the political forces that maybe were formed in opposition to Trump or in opposition to Obama had a lot to do with Trump. Trump says like, you know, Tea Party, that's just my people now, and that seems to be more or less true. But I think to go back to the kind of big American archetypes thing, which I like talking in that idiom. It's fun. Americans have they're weird creatures in the sense that they can be so hopeful and so cynical at the same time. Mm-hmm. And so cynical and so naive.
But doesn't cynicism come from hope, ultimately?
Like lost hope, you're saying?
Yeah, the only
like
way to become truly
hope?
Cynical is to have really believed and hoped.
Yes.
Like a scorned lover.
Yes. I think Americans protect themselves from their hope with their cynicism, and their cynicism with their hope. And so I just, like, people say about Obama, like, I wanted to believe in the America that he described. People on the right say that, you know, and I think that's true. I think people did. He was very good at that. But I don't necessarily think, again, I just don't necessarily think that the whole explanation is that Obama didn't deliver that America and then people became cynical. I think there's more going on, and that cynicism and hopefulness are in tension at all times in the American psyche.
Yeah, you know what I guess for me, and you know, Trump's not an orator. I mean, he's sort of does all this stuff from the gut. But it was Bannon and Steve Miller who wrote the American Carnage speech, right? And I remember listening to that in real time, and a lot of commentators were like, "That's not the America I recognize." To me, it wasn't so much that it was the America I recognize, but it was an incredibly powerful speech, and I remember even thinking then is just like, what kind of speech would a third term Obama have given? It would have been very likely an equally powerful speech, knowing Obama and his capabilities, just in a completely different vector. And I think it would have resonated similarly. This is just my argument on politics and the fact that you know, I think if we focus too much on these, you know, on class and sort of economic things and deliverables, I think we miss something, because American Carnage arguably doesn't capture, you know, like certainly not the full picture of America, but you know, I mean, it's cartoonish, and it's cartoonish in a negative way. That quite frankly, a lot of Obama's soaring rhetoric is cartoonish in the positive way, and it's just resonant, you know.
There's also, I mean, yeah, and it matters. I do think it's so hard to remember what. once when in the beginning of the Trump era, we were all trying to figure out like what did get undone. Did he break some fundamental rule, like well before he tried to stay president after he lost an election? But did he break some kind of fundamental rule of politics, of the way to do politics, the way to talk as a president? Like, and what was it? And I do think that one thing that's just universally better for a democratic polity is like calling on people's better angels rather than inciting them to their devilish instincts. And I just think, just fundamentally, you got to do that. And I think now, I think now it is something that's a little bit unfortunate about the way that the Democrats have embraced, kind of, because it worked to demonize Trump and Trump voters so much that it seems like they won these elections. The kind of the basket of deplorables has been kind of like softened and become just a sort of normal part of Democratic Party rhetoric at this point. So while I do think obviously Biden is more of a calling on the better angels type politician than Trump, there's something about what happened with polarization in the parties and the media during the Trump era that it would just seem laughable if to give a speech like Obama's, there is no blue America, there is no red America.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, I forgot about. I mean, obviously, it's one of his most famous rhetorical flourishes, but it's just hearing you say that right now, I can't even believe that we could have imagined our country that way.
And they did.
Yeah. I mean,
I think that was from the 04.
Yeah.
Or from the 04 speech.
Whatever it wasn't that long ago. I mean, the 2000s, I guess.
But he kept that theme when he was president, too.
No, right. So. But, exactly. so it just gets to the other part of this, which is, get back to that question of resentment and authenticity and how that sort of pans out. I mean, one of the phenomena, and I think one of the phenomena of that DeSantis is trying to capitalize on, was that a certain sort of segment of professional conservative Washington and elites and sort of power brokers, they tried to embrace and tame Trump, came away burnt, especially after January 6th. They felt like absolutely never again. And so DeSantis is trying to capitalize on that. But here's my prediction right now, 18 months in. Trump is going to own the Republican Party within 18 months. And, the Bill Kristols and the Dispatch folks, they are going to be a rounding error. That actually, that desire for what Trump brings to the table is more appealing than Trump himself is unappealing. I don't think this means he's going to win, because I do think that there's some subset of swing voters that won't vote for an indicted man, and I think you're going to see that in turnout at the end in what will probably be a close election. That's how I'm sort of anticipating it right now. But I really do think that this idea that there's a faction of the Republican Party that would rather support Biden and Democrats than line up behind Trump is way overstated. I think you're going to see a real consolidation around Trump because of this resentment stuff, because of that authenticity, because his authentic nihilism actually taps into something real for voters that, and to your point, I think, that Biden and the Democrats in their own sort of approach to the post-Trump politics have sort of entrenched even further.
Yeah, well, Demir, before you brought up DeSantis just a minute ago, I'd forgotten that we were even supposed to talk about Ron DeSantis, or even that Sam's op-ed was ostensibly, well, at least had Ron DeSantis in the title, which I think which illustrates something pretty important. I mean, he's not psychologically or anthropologically compelling. No. Like we're falling back on much more interesting things to talk about, and maybe we should just say a word or two for Ron DeSantis. I mean, let me think of something.
I read his book.
He has a
What's
book?
the book?
His new book, The
good?
Courage to Be Free.
Sounds great.
Okay,
Not to be confused with the Paul Tillich, The Courage to Be.
Interesting clarification. Did he also have a book in 2011? Like Ron DeSantis?
He had a book like right when he got elected to Congress too.
Okay, and you read
which was
that?
all
You
about,
read the new one.
Yeah, I've read a bunch of the old one too. The old one was all about Obama and how Obama was a secret Marxist. It was like classic of the genre. This
and
one
the new
was
one?
The new one's just a campaign book. It's really bad. It's really stupid. It's short, stupid, but it's funny. One of you said, I think it was definitely Shadi. You said that people feel that there's something wrong with the country, right? That is literally the first line of his book.
Okay,
but well, yeah. I mean, I don't know how bad that is for. I don't think that takes away from the point. But I think maybe it's just kind of like he knows that that's the thing to say, because that is kind of in the part of his Frankenstein that is the Trump resentment part. I think the other thing I thought about when we were talking about kind of the American conspiratorial, the American weird America, is that this is something that I also think. So the refrain at the end of this book, DeSantis's book, is "Make America Florida."
wait, like literally?
That's what he says. "Make America Florida."
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Okay.
Because the whole book is about how Florida has resisted the woke mind virus, and we did the pandemic right, and Florida is now the kind of citadel of liberty and normal America.
Does that have a lot of appeal to non-Floridians? I just wonder about.
It's weird. It's weird. But what I was going to say is just that it's so funny. This is like another way in which he doesn't really compute. I feel like just doesn't work on a gut level. Is that Florida is one of the weirdest places in America. It is so weird, and it's so like. You can't really have one idea of Florida in your head at any time. You drive to different parts of it. Just obviously, like racially, it's super diverse. Like it's just and there's just like it's literally a meme in America, like the Florida man. It's just like somebody doing something stupid or crazy, and so it's just I just think like the mismatch between DeSantis's sort of like hyper-normative vision for what America needs, America should be as this kind of more conservative, patriarchal, anti, weirded out by trans people image is like it just doesn't map onto Florida at all. I mean, if you make America Florida, it just gets way weirder than it is now.
To your point there, it's really interesting because the other fantastic phenomenon, right, is that as soon as DeSantis, well, I mean, it started before DeSantis started, when DeSantis was governing Florida and COVID and all his sort of COVID posturing and his moves and things like that. Conservatives started building him up and building up Florida as this. So it actually fits into this kind of, conservative orthodoxy. And that's been so fascinating to watch Trump right now. Like the latest attack has been Florida's a shithole. Like Ron DeSantis has destroyed it, and it goes against every single talking point that Republicans have set up as so like the virtues of it. He doesn't care. He flips on it, and it's going to work. Because it doesn't matter. None of this stuff matters. This is the argument against output legitimacy and that like he's delivering on stuff. Trump turns around, and the other part is like, this is where Trump's horse sense comes in. He delivered the justices to overturn Roe v. Wade, and now he's attacking DeSantis for being too extreme on abortion in Florida.
Yeah.
Again, brilliant. Like, because he sees where the thing is. He's like, people, don't be stupid. And they're going to follow him on this. They're going to be like, yeah, absolutely. We need to win and stuff like that. So again, I don't go on, Shadi.
But isn't this in line with Trump's anti-competence? Because essentially what he's, militating against is DeSantis's claim that he was a competent governor of a major state and got things done. And this is actually a major point in your New York Times piece, Sam, where you basically argue, as far as that DeSantis is a kind of technocrat. He does actually talk a lot about performance or output legitimacy. He does talk about sanity. He does talk about results. He does talk about delivering. And I think that's hard for maybe a lot of liberals in America to get their heads around, that actually Ron DeSantis is someone who respects expertise and takes it seriously. And I think, as you point out, the only difference is that he relies on different kinds of experts and different kinds of expertise, but he still values the idea of expertise and that there are a group of people at the top who can make better decisions and be more competent.
Yeah. One of the kind of one of the things I pointed out in the piece is the COVID thing, which that's still one of his major claims to fame on the right, is that we reopened Florida fast because because we believe in liberty and protecting small businesses and stuff. But when you look at it, what he actually did in the reporting on it, he met with the epidemiologists who signed the Great Barrington Statement, which is just like this alternative view about how we might deal with this pandemic.
All signed by experts.
Harvard, AEI economists, like experts. They're maybe more conservative, or they're a little more. They're different. They have different ideas about epidemiology, but they're experts, And the whole, and in the sort of profiles of DeSantis, Bhattacharya, the epidemiologist from Stanford, talks about meeting him, and he was so amazed because he read all these preprints and medical journals and stuff, and it's that's it's exactly what you're talking about. It's he's another expert. He's a calm, cool and competent hand at the tiller, and he knows how to converse with these types of people. It's just a different sort of thing than Trump's thing.
So with
and then if you think about Trump's COVID performance too, it's also Trump's COVID performance was legitimately erratic. It was crazy the way he was doing things. Certainly the way he was talking about it. The vaccine stuff, they did a good job, and but it was genuinely while he was doing those briefings, remember, it was whoa, this is a crazy guy. He's crazy, and this is concerning, which is just different from choosing to listen to particular experts who tell you, actually you can do this instead, and if we do the plan this way, then you don't have to close the schools, and that's precision, discipline, competence. It's just different answers. He obviously, Florida is a tourism state. The state was going to be so fucked if they really shut down as much as some other places. So he found the experts that told him that.
But before you jump in, Shadi, the interesting thing about Trump though, again, is his lack of principles. Because I don't know if you guys remember, for a little bit there, he tried to get conservatives or whatever Trumpists to after January 6th, after he was out, if I remember correctly, he was saying Operation Warp Speed, we did it, et cetera. And
my vaccine.
And that just, he dropped that like a hot potato when that just no one followed him on that. He was like, okay, that's it. You don't hear him talk about that anymore. But he tried for a second to be actually, we got stuff done. And people were like, boo. And it's all right, fuck it.
Well, they should have let, Democrats should have encouraged them to call it the Trump vaccine. You know, everybody who gets it, that was a real missed opportunity.
Well, I guess, okay, so this raises a question.
The Donald J. Trump Memorial Vaccine.
No, that would...
Memorial? Oh.
That's catchy.